The leader is a leader because he is a servant. This leader is someone who inspires his followers, her followers.
Through our series of Tutu Talks, the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation hopes to reframe unresolved issues within civil society and uncover what moral and ethical leadership entails.
Nwabisa, thank you very much for joining us today. Been really looking forward to speaking to you and learning more from you. Maybe let's start with, where did you grow up? Where are you from? What was that like?
Thank you so much for having me. I think it's always a privilege to have the opportunity to talk about things and to share and hopefully maybe even learn a little bit about myself and about you through this conversation. So I'm Nwabisa. I am the only daughter to a mother who lives in the Eastern Cape. So I was born in the Eastern Cape, born in East London in 1981. So I'm dating myself, but I'm okay with that. And then would have had the formative years of my life were spent in Tanzania, which would have been the former Ciskei or the Ciskei at the time, and then moved to Bisho, which was the capital of the Ciskei.
Yeah.
So it's quite an interesting take on that, because upon reflection, to realize that I only became South African well into my teenage years. Up until then, I wasn't South African.
Isn't that weird?
Very strange. And I think that becomes part of the story, right? In terms of the stories we have, the labels that we take on, the things we have to unlearn, and that kind of thing. So for me, growing up as an only child with a single mom, a nurse, but there was this idea of, we're going to make sure that we get this thing right as a team, and we're going to make sure that we're going to get, and the one thing we can get right together is if we achieve through education.
Yeah.
So I actually then became almost a deputy parent to myself and to my mom, and at the same time really knew that to help her, I needed to be good, and I needed to be good at school effectively. And so I've actually had this path of achievement all along. Where I sit today, of course, there's a lot to unpack around what achievement looks like, but in that moment it served me. So I had an interesting time growing up with my mom.
Yeah, it sounds like you were raised by a powerful woman.
Sure, yes. I mean, she herself was is incredibly powerful. And then in the household was my grandmother. So we were 3 generations in the same house. I didn't have a grandfather, so for me, I've always looked at this idea of these women in the house. My mother's one of 3 girls, so I have aunts.
Yeah.
Each of them, are either divorced or widowed. So actually, it's just women in terms of my understanding of how the world works and where you find wisdom, nurturing, strength, inspiration, entertainment, a little bit of discipline. Lot of discipline actually came from these women, wild women, who actually were in the house. And so I like to think about myself as being part of this lineage of effectively wild women.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. So school and further, where did that lead you?
Sure. So of course, when I started school, this was at a time when we weren't really allowed to integrate. And so not even really allowed, we just simply were not allowed to integrate. But there were these few sort of pockets of defiance and maybe loopholes in the system. So a lot of the Roman Catholic schools allowed for integration. And so we talk about going to a multiracial school. And so I was part of that system. And then when the schools opened up after the referendum, which I think was in 1991 or 1992, I then went into what was then a former Model C school. But it meant that I was part of that cohort of young Black South Africans who then always had the label of first Black this, first Black team, first Black captain or whatever. And so there was then almost part of it, a sense of achievement, but also the burden and the responsibility to achieve in order to then be that first Black and to show that we can do this. So I finished schooling in King Williamstown, so it's kind of next to Bisho, strange quirk of apartheid spatial planning where there's this pocket of South Africa in the middle of the Ciskei, but at this point we were all one. I finished 1999, which is again a very interesting point in terms of the whole world was having a panic about Y2K. If you remember that, with the computers, know what to do when we switched over at midnight to 00. And then, of course, I actually then went on to become an exchange student. So since the end of my primary school, so what we would have called Standard 5 or Grade 7, I had met an exchange student from Canada who came to my school, and I looked at this woman, and I looked back in my eyes, she was huge. And I said, I want to be an exchange student. And I remember going back home and saying to my mom, I want to be an exchange student. So when the time came at the end of high school, and I was asked what I wanted to do and what was the plan, I said, I want to be an exchange student. I'm still there. My mom said, well, it turns out I've been saving for that. So all you have to do now is go apply and make sure you're selected. So that's more sort of part of the process. But then I did apply and I was selected. And so I got to spend a year in Belgium. Also an interesting time because that was the year 2000, so the final year before Europe became what we know it today in terms of the EU, the Euros. So to arrive in Europe, and people are kind of feeling nostalgic and poignant about the fact that very soon they'll be losing the money that they understand now, but they're excited about this idea of this common currency. Of course, I didn't have language about this then, but to look back and realize that I seem to have also been part of these very interesting sort of turning points in whether it was South African history or global history. And so that means something to kind of keep taking and adding to that bucket of experiences and meaning around what I exist to do here in life. So that was me living in Belgium, and also the first sort of foray into an international globalized arena, meeting more people, some like me, a lot very different from me, learning a new language, which is French, living a very European but different version of European lifestyles. I lived in a village in Belgium, but again, their version of village is obviously something else, but all of my ideas kind of being swapped around and turned upside down. But I think the most important thing for me there was it allowed for me to unlearn or to shed other stories that I had. So I could actually enter that situation and not come in with the first black story. That didn't matter anymore. I could also walk into a situation and walk away with the idea of, remember at school we had our blazers with the badges. Yes. I could do away with that need to prove and to have the badges. I just had to come in and be me, and whatever version of me I presented to that space is the version of me that then existed in that space.
So quite a transformative experience, I think, as a teenager. Where did that lead you as you decided what you wanted to do with your life?
So I think it still continues to lead me. So this is over 20 years that experience happened. So for me, it became the beginnings of the articulation of my present purpose, or how I articulate purpose as it pertains to me today. So my purpose is to connect people to each other and to opportunities. And I think so much of that came from that moment where you don't always have a lot of time to connect with other exchange students, or even the people that you're meeting at the school that you're at, or you're spending a year and you're living across 3 different host families. So everything felt so transient all the time. So you knew that you needed to find connection immediately, and that connection could be deep, but it could also be passing, and you could also let go of that connection. So how do you make the most of it as you go along? So that was one sense of, I think, meaning that I got from that moment, and I continue to kind of interrogate that and watch it unfurl in my life. It then also brought a sense of think local, act global, as it were. And so for me, even in my work today, how do I bring as much of South Africa to the rest of the world, and how do I bring the rest of the world into South Africa? It could be just me, it could be in my work, it could be in my friendships, but this idea of being incredibly global has been really, really important for me. And I mean, you know what it's like in Europe. You know, if it's Tuesday, it's Belgium. Wednesday, you're in Croatia. And so even that idea of changing borders and moving across these tiny countries, it just completely energizes and activates my sense of we've got to keep moving, we've got to understand each other from around the world, and we've got to connect.
Wow. So what did you decide to do with your life?
So I didn't decide what to do with my life. At some point at that age, decisions were made for me. So again, when you have that, some labels and some stories, and so I was first black, of course, in everything that was happening. I was very, very smart in terms of passing the exams, getting the right marks. And so the story is you will become a chartered accountant. This is a noble profession. This is what is going to make us proud. You will get a job in a big company. You'll drive a nice car. And maybe you'll take an overseas holiday once a year from the nice bonus that you earn. So I came back and I was a student at the University of Cape Town, registered for a degree in order to become a chartered accountant. Now listen, I did 2 years of this course, and it's a wonderful discipline, and I think we need all the accountants in the world. But I just was like, no, this is not really what I'm supposed to be doing. Of course, again, I didn't have language, but what I knew is I woke up one day and I thought, wow, I'm supposed to be doing debit credit until I'm 65. That was the most frightening thought that I could ever have for myself. I understand that, of course, that the realm of accounting is a lot more complex than debit credit, but that's kind of the crisis point that I was at in my life. So I then deregistered. Much to my mother's shock, she thought I was actually going to drop out of university, and so she massaged enough to say, stay, but I'm giving you the permission and the space to study whatever you want. Go to every single faculty on that campus and pick up a faculty handbook. I'm sure now it's digital, but pick up a faculty handbook and spend the next week just paging through every handbook and find the course that's going to be exciting to you. Register for that course and just finish it. Now, whatever it ends up being, it doesn't matter. So I ended up then going into first year of the humanities, moving from Faculty of Commerce, and did a degree in social science, political science, majoring political science and public administration. What that has done for me today is that it has made me one of the biggest fans of the humanities, in terms of this is a realm where we are being trained to understand where we come from, or at least to ask about where we come from in order to understand or try and imagine where we will end up. And hopefully those two pieces of the equation help us form some understanding of where we are today. And so if you're able to understand that about human beings in terms of what moves us, what frightens us, what delights us, I think you start solving a lot of issues, whether they're in politics or looking at issues within religion or looking at the economy, because that is actually the base move for all human beings. It's either we're frightened or we're delighted. And so I think that's what the humanities helped me to understand. And I think maybe it was clear from even the time I'd been in Belgium that I am clearly curious about that aspect of the human experience in terms of who are we, who were we, and who might we be.
So what did you do with this degree?
So the degree was challenging for me at that time, because it wasn't a case of when I graduate, I come out of it and I am A. So I thought, okay, so that was my first piece of the challenge. Then I was part of a lot of the graduate recruitment programs, and so applying for different interview processes, taking all the psychometric tests, until there were a few people who were honest with me, who said, you know, your profile is really interesting and we can see how you are an achiever in so many aspects. But there's this one thing that spikes and it worries us in your profile. And it's the fact that it says not good with authority.
Oops.
So it kind of tells us that you're not going to be a good graduate placement, because you're going to be a wild person in the organization. Might be celebrated later on in your career, but at this early stage, maybe not going to be a good fit. You're going to struggle. So this one woman said, I think you should start your own thing. So honestly, I then started a business thinking that, and that was funny enough before we had the word entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
You became self-employed, you started a business. I had a business partner, and that's what we did. We created jobs for ourselves. That's where that started. But then as time went on, and quite quickly into that, there was this idea of, why are we doing this? And so our why at that point was that we felt this urgent need to be part of a movement of young South Africans who could inspire other young South Africans to remain in South Africa. Because at that time, we were all completely mad about going to London when we finished school. And so we thought, you know, there is a critical role that corporate South Africa can play in enabling this inspiration that young people can have in terms of wanting to stay in South Africa and being part of the nation building project. Of course, we'd actually also been recipients of this form of inspiration through another corporate sort of initiative that we'd participated in high school. So we went back to that same corporate to say, well, let's think about this a little bit more. I look back and I realize all of this was mad, kind of showing up in these fancy offices, Alice Lane in Sandton, Johannesburg. I don't have a brown cent to my name. I've never thought about being a consultant. I've never seen anyone in my family work for themselves. Everyone's always had a job. In fact, my people in my family prided themselves for getting long service awards in terms of staying in their jobs. So that's kind of this idea of starting a business that now I look back, I realize it was purpose driven, but also it was this idea of bringing in the fact that you can also be profit driven in what you're doing in your business, and you can also benchmark yourself amongst the best of the best. So by the time we were starting to really have a product in terms of our consulting services, we were benchmarking ourselves against one of those companies that I should have been working for when I thought I was going to be an accountant.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people thought was cheeky, because what we were doing was effectively coming out of the corporate social responsibility sort of bucket of resources. How dare, when you're sitting in corporate social responsibility, that you come and charge us these consulting rates when you're doing feel-good work or when you're doing good work. This weird, what is this trade-off between doing good work and being paid well? At the end of the day, I'm bringing in incredible skills and incredible value, and I'm bringing in sort of long duration and long sustainable sort of value into an impact that will come out of this. And so I am very proud to look back. So this company then went on to be quite a well-known consultancy that we were running. We acquired a new business partner. So in terms of entrepreneurship, learning this idea of you start a business as two, what does it look like when you bring in a third equity partner? How do you negotiate for that to happen? How do you diversify skills within your management team? How do you then create structures where you are both enabling your team but also managing a team without controlling a team? How do you become valuable to your business without becoming an impediment to the business? I mean, huge conversations that you're having, and internally, and it's super personal in terms of what you're doing. No coaching, no mentoring, no one coming in and having a cup of coffee with me and helping me look at my financial statements. You're just bumbling your way through this thing. I'm a black girl from the Eastern Cape with no business experience, no social capital, but somehow I'm just doing this thing. And so at that time, my mantra was, if I can just be excellent in everything that I do, it will solve for all the other kinks in the journey. So, yeah.
So I think in this country, we are encouraging a lot of people to become entrepreneurs because there's not jobs going around. What is your advice to somebody that's kind of starting out? They're not quite sure how this is all going to work.
So I think there is a bit around, we must be careful, I think, even as a society, in terms of why we're encouraging entrepreneurship. So I think if we're encouraging entrepreneurship just to solve for the youth unemployment crisis, we're coming at it the wrong way, because you're just creating a lot of people who are going to create businesses that then effectively are, I'm self-employed, I have a business, that's it. If we go back to trying to maybe unpack what entrepreneurship is, then we might start figuring out, when do we encourage, who do we encourage, and how do we encourage? And so for me, this is not my own definition, this is kind of out there, but entrepreneurship really is this idea of, can you create an entity that has processes, that has a team, that solves for a challenge within a community, within a society, that then that same community, society is willing to pay for? That's a business. That's entrepreneurship, because you're adding value into the system, because you're solving for a challenge. Now, can you drive innovation through that? That's now either making things go better, go faster, go bigger. That's also very, very interesting. Can you now make sure that that business or the process of entrepreneurship leaves a better sort of footprint on the economy, on the planet, and on the people on this planet? That's gold, right? So if we can start thinking about entrepreneurship from that point of view, then we start wondering, who can we encourage and how do we enable people to become entrepreneurs? So that's the one piece around that. Now, what would I say to, let's say, little old me starting her businesses, all those many years ago? It would be, personally, also know your why. So why do you do this? What keeps you up at night and what gets you out of bed? Because that's starting to give you a sense of your purpose. Your purpose will then start guiding you towards the kind of business you want to run, and then it will start helping you make decisions about your business. Who do you partner with? Who do you bring into your business? What kind of clients and customers you have? What kind of relationships you want to have with your customers and clients? And also helps you make decisions, obviously, in navigating troubled waters. But I think the interesting thing is that this is the sort of the North Star of being in South Africa, your Southern Cross, that will give you direction of what to do when you also have opportunity. As entrepreneurs. And maybe that's the first big practical thing with entrepreneurship, is a lot of opportunities for us as entrepreneurs will look very, very shiny. So how do you get to a point of making sure that you understand that not every shiny thing is for you? And so being able to make sense of that. And that's where purpose starts coming in. So the advice to any budding and emerging entrepreneur, and in fact, even existing entrepreneurs, is check in with your purpose. Why do you do what you do? And that is the beginning of your journey.
So what sustained you in your journey as an entrepreneur? Because it's a tough life.
It's tough, it's lonely, it's infuriating, it's exhilarating, very, very high highs, and then very deep and dark lows. And so I think internally what sustained me, and I think is what continues to sustain me now, is just a little bit of a sense of humor, where you realize that there's very little in life that's ever that serious. So being able to laugh at yourself, laugh at others a little bit, but really laugh at yourself is important. A lot of people like to identify me as a prankster or somebody who brings in a little bit of mad energy into a room. The second thing is being able to recognize those who exist to help you. So you don't always have the ability to ask for help, and that's okay. But there are people who start surrounding you to actually offer help, and being able to see that help and receive it for what it is, kind of set your ego away. And that help can be whether it's personal support, financial support, because you do need that when you're an entrepreneur, because there are years where you will not make any money. And then I think being able to then understand that you're actually not really that alone. You'll perceive yourself as being lonely, but to seek out other networks and to understand that there are more people like me. I cannot be the only person on this green earth who's doing this thing that I'm doing, and I cannot be the only person who's going through what I'm going through. So where can I find other people who are kind of in the same position as me? And that becomes an incredible source of support and then a way of being sustained. Today, what sustains me is being able to say, I think I am who I wish I had as an entrepreneur 15 years ago. So to understand that everything I'm doing is for who I was 15 years ago sustains me, because I think it's okay to then help the other entrepreneurs.
So how are you showing up for them?
So, my personal capacity, it's about how I spend my money. And so there's nothing that excites me at the moment around the opportunities that exist today. And I think the opportunities that lie ahead for women entrepreneurs. And even, I think specifically women entrepreneurs in the creative economy. And so you will see in terms of the decisions I make around what I wear, in terms of how I decorate my home, the food that I eat, the holidays I take, you know, what I bring into even my support system and how I can spend my money, it all goes into women entrepreneurs. And if they can be Black, oh my goodness, then, you know, that is me in my happy space.
Awesome.
And so I'm showing up for entrepreneurs even in terms of how I spend and how I can even influence other people to spend their money. So there's sort of the big sort of thematic work that I do in terms of my day-to-day job. And then there are the everyday decisions that I make, and that's showing up for the entrepreneurs. I think finally, it's showing up for entrepreneurs by just being, in terms of being able to discuss, articulate, interrogate certain things that maybe they just aren't wanting to talk about, or because at this point we seem to think that the only way to enable entrepreneurs is through a specific playbook or a specific journey. For me to present my story, to present myself in the room, gives entrepreneurs the option to either then reject what I represent, or then maybe say, oh, that could also be me, or I could walk alongside this woman. That's okay. I'm not saying everybody must be a part of what I'm talking about, but having the option in terms of ways to do things is part of how I show up for the entrepreneurs.
Wow. Let's talk about Archbishop Tutu, because
This is why we are
kind of
here.
here. Yes. What do you know of him, have learned from him, that you are applying in your life?
So what inspires me about how Archbishop Tutu would have lived his life is this idea of being able to bring his full self into the conversation. Because again, there are stories that people have about us, and so that story sometimes exists to put us in a box and to limit us in terms of how we're supposed to then engage in a situation or conversation. So the assumption would be, when you see the Arch, is that he is a cleric and that he is this peace-loving old man who just wanted all of us to love one another. Fair enough. But I think to see moments where he would bring his rage into conversations, where he would bring his irritation into conversations, where he'd bring defiance into conversations, really inspires me, because I think, you know, going all the way back to how I told my story in terms of, you are socialized to be good. You're socialized to sit nicely at the table and to be grateful that you are at the table. And so to be able to sit at the table and say, I don't even like this table, but let's go and have a conversation, is important. To be able to be assertive and actually even aggressive at times, I think that is important, and there's permissions. And so for me, I'm inspired and I am motivated by the fact that it feels like the Arch gives us permission to sometimes come in with the edge when we are in certain conversations and how we exist in the world.
So your leadership style is what?
My leadership style is quite collaborative. So I like to ask questions. I like to ask questions to the point that maybe you might even be irritated in terms of, why is she asking all these questions? And then on the other hand, I like to also show. So in terms of, I'm going to try this thing myself and show, so that by the time I'm giving you the opportunity to collaborate in this, it's also coming from a place of saying that when maybe I'm a little bit more demanding in the situation, it's not because I'm being unfair, it's because I also did it. I know the pain points, I know what hurts, and I can also listen if at some point you maybe say, this is not how I want to do it, because I'll say, well, I get this from you, so this is not some theoretical pie in the sky idea that I'm bringing into the conversation. And then most importantly, I think my leadership style is embedded in fun. Fun for me is an incredibly legitimate tactic in terms of achieving things, enabling other people, and allowing for some creativity to come into the room. And so this notion of play and fun is a huge aspect of how I go about leading teams.
Wow. Any final thoughts about where we're going as a country? Do you have hope for young people in this country?
I will always have hope for anyone and for everything. And I think there is a bit of perspective, and maybe this is from the humanities, in terms of it's very easy for every generation to look at the generation that's coming behind them and be worried about them.
Yeah.
Because we kind of exist to try and preserve our status quo. And so when it's being challenged by those who come behind us, we're worried about them because they're dangerous. So actually, I have all the hope in the world. I absolutely enjoy the young people who I think we call AMA 2000s. You know, these young kids were born in the early 2000s. I think this is a pretty joyful generation, a pretty funky generation that's coming through. It's expressing itself in ways that we've never thought we could express ourselves. And so with that, I think exists opportunity for incredible innovation. I think there comes this incredible opportunity for young people to be smart disruptors. And at the same time, these are young people who'll challenge us to be better. And so if young people can kind of own that, then we're going to be okay.
Wow, Nwabisa, thank you very much for your energy. It's just awesome talking to you.
Thank you.
I'm glad that you came, and I'm glad we had this conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure being in conversation with you.
Awesome.